whole world is, in a sense, the interweaving and the display, the theophany of the divine qualities. And the Quran speaks of God's most beautiful names, which are traditionally recited in a list of 99. So the Muslim rosary, the prayer beads, have 99 beads traditionally. So we remember the compassionate, the merciful, the judge, the overpowering, the omnipotent, all of these beautiful names. And the world is simply made up of the concatenation of those names. So when we look at the world, we're not looking at God, but we're certainly looking at signposts, nothing but signposts, pointing back to the divine source. The Quran says that in the creation of the heavens and the earth, the succession of night and day are signs for people of understanding. Which means when we set aside ego, self-interest, jealousy, insecurity, and be our spiritual selves, away from the turbulence of the self, that we naturally, as it were, log on to the meaning of things. And we see the world as theophanic, that is to say, a display of divine perfect qualities. So there is something profoundly indicative but also healing about nature. And therefore nature requires to be reverenced, which is why we have in our ethical code inherited from the Prophet strict rules about how you treat trees, for instance, how you deal with water, how you deal with the animal world. So the idea of animal rights is there in medieval Islamic law long before it was a twinkle in the eye of Western liberal ethicists. So the idea of the world as being God's and of God, and therefore deserving of reverence, and its abuse being a form of blasphemy, is something that's conventional Muslim belief. Well, there are so many verses in the Quran and the Prophet's words about nature and the need to revere it. Creation is not fallen in the Islamic view. It is an aspect of the divine perfection. There's one verse which is frequently cited, which runs something like, "There is no animal that creeps upon the earth, nor any bird that flies with its two wings, but that they are nations like yourselves." This, of course, has occasioned a good deal of head-scratching among the classical commentators. How can these be nations? How can they be analogous to human collectivities? And in what sense are they like ourselves? And the general view is that this means that they are moral communities. That is to say that they have rights. So there's plenty of sayings of the Prophet that, for instance, where he condemns somebody who's taken chicks out of a mother bird's nest, and he says, take it back because the bird is distressed. And where he, for instance, finds an animal that is a camel that is behaving in a very dangerous way, and people say, don't go into the camel's enclosure because it's a dangerous animal. The Prophet goes in, looks at the animal, puts his hand on the camel's snout, and the camel is calm. And then he comes out and he says, this camel tells me that it is being given too much to carry and too much work to do. And the owner of the camel comes up in tears and saying, a messenger of God, it's true, that's what I do. And because of his desire for repentance, he then allows the camel, as it were, early retirement, and it gets the best fodder to eat and isn't given any subsequent work. So there's plenty of stories in which the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of the religion, goes out of his way to emphasize kindness to animals and to the natural world. So in a sense, yes, they have rights, they are sentient, they feel, they have emotional lives, and therefore they have rights. And this has always been a very important aspect of the Muslim understanding, that we are a species that has a moral life, an intellectual life, a mystical life that, in a sense, can be more discursive because it thinks of outcomes and the future in a way that animals can't. But nonetheless, we are part of the larger biotic community, as they say. We are one element of the totality of the interweaving of the natural world, which God in his amazing plenitude has set in this creation. And as a result, we have very serious responsibilities, not just for the well-being of other human beings, but to our fellow creatures, as traditional Islam would put it, in all orders of creation. Well, I imagine that the religious case against materialism is something that spans religious divisions. All of the religions insist that we don't live by bread alone, and that the current consumer-addicted society is not only bad for our spiritual life, but is clearly bad for all other orders of creation as well. So I'm sure that we stand shoulder to shoulder with other believers in saying too much materialism makes us sick and makes the planet sick, and that the rather secular dimensions of mainstream climate change activism have tended not to buy into the need for less consumption rather than more careful consumption, that we need to be looking upwards and inwards rather than just at what's on the supermarket shelves. So I think that there's an ascetic message in the monotheisms in particular, which needs to enrich the climate change activism discourse. But there's also, I think, more than that, and again, I think other religionists would agree, that so much activism has focused on the fact that we should worry about the degradation of the natural environment because it's now threatening our own survival and our own comfort. And I think that's a very short-sighted and probably not adequate grounds for bringing about the huge revolution that is going to be globally required if we get into more sustainable habits as a species. That instead we should be looking at the natural world not as resources to be conserved and to be husbanded, but at the natural world as having rights of its own integrity independent of human needs. So that the other species, the other nations of which the Quran speaks, that the world seen from the perspective of the lions, the world seen from the perspective of the rabbits, of the birds, whatever, different optics with which we can see life on Earth, that they have their own integrity. And of course, from our perspective, we see them as having an integrity because in their own way, they are praising God and bearing witness to the majesty and the perfection of the one who created them. So it's a sacralizing, a re-enchantment, as it were, of our vision of the natural world is something that I think Islam and generally the religions can very significantly contribute to the conventional, rather materialistic discourse on climate change and conservation.